quorum number 2.
Yeah, just
We're on.
when
Here we go. Thank you.
it should be a majority of council as opposed to.
Right, we'll go. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. Welcome to this meeting of the Safety and Resilience Committee. Welcome to those in the room and those online and on the live stream. I will just open the meeting with a karakia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumie hui taiki. So good to have you all here, bright and early. We have 4 papers for this morning, but let's see. Apologies. We have received, I believe, an apology from Councillor Laws. That's all. And Councillor McCall. Thanks. Someone care to move we accept those? Thank you. Councillor Falls, seconder. Councillor Weir, all in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That's all good. We have no requests for public forum. So confirmation of the agenda, we are not intending to make any changes to the agenda, so that's fine. Declarations of interest, members have declared those are available online. Are there any changes to the interests that we need to know about this morning? No, looks as though that's all good. So we'll move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the last Safety and Resilience Committee meeting, which was on the 7th of November 2024. Are there any comments on those minutes where we might need to make any amendments? I do not see any. Well, look, can I move that we confirm those minutes? Seconder, thank you, Councillor Kelleher. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you very much. That's done. No action register. There are no open actions, no presentations. So we move on to our matters for consideration. And the first paper, 9.1, Program Update, Climate Resilience and RIF Tranche 1. And I believe we are welcoming Brett Patterson to the front of the room. Thank you very much, Brett. So we'll hand over to you in a moment and we'll let you give a bit of talk about this, and then when there are questions, as I'm sure there will be, we will hear from that. Now look, I'll just alert councillors and the others listening to potentially shocking news in here that we are about to hear about some engineering projects that were completed on time and on budget. Right, Brett, all yours.
Thank you. So this paper is just to provide a bit of an update on our climate resilience program and our RIF Tranche 1 program. The climate resilience program has been around for a little while now. It started in 2020, had 4 projects in it, being the Contour Channel, Riverside Road, Robson Lagoon, and the Outram Wading Blanket. The outcomes around those 4 projects, they're all about resilience to the schemes. So particularly the Contour Channel, Outram and Riverside Road are about protecting our infrastructure. Outram around seepage, Contour Channel around overtopping and piping failure of the banks, Riverside Road around erosion protection. Robson Lagoon is a little project that was focused around ecology, health of the waterway, along with flood conveyance and operational safety. So I'll take the papers of read and open for questions.
I am looking around the room for questions and online. I cannot see any yet. Yes, Councillor Malcolm.
The Riverbank Road realignment, and where you've done the rock revetment and everything down there, how susceptible is that to man-made water changes as opposed to flood conditions? So do we control the water levels there? We don't.
No, we don't.
No, it's just straight.
Yeah, so there is some control on Maclutha from the dams upstream.
Yep.
But ORC doesn't have control around the water.
Right, so from the dams upstream, that doesn't you're comfortable that's sufficiently built to stand that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Looks really good from after I walk around it. Yeah. Thank you.
Brett, I wonder if you could just go take us through some of the significant projects and just clarify or spell out, what's the outcome of these? What are the benefits that the Otago environment and community are receiving from these? Not necessarily every single thing that's in there, but the most significant things.
Sure. So if we take the Contour Channel, for example, that series of projects have been around since the mid-80s. The banks along there are very aged. A lot of issues with overtopping, and we've had piping failures through there in the past. So I suppose the outcome is to provide a level of service that meets our target level of service, for one. That we don't have overtopping, we don't want it, and we don't have premature failure of those banks in a flood event. But those banks are pretty critical to the operation of the scheme as a whole, and protect an awful lot of infrastructure and valuable farmland and that sort of thing within those catchments. And the same can be said for the Riverbank Road project. That rock armouring is right adjacent to a flood bank that protects Stirling. A lot of assets sitting behind those. And likewise for at Outram, there's a known area of seepage pushing under the bank at that point, which we've now mitigated. That provides us with confidence that the bank's going to stay there as we want it to in a high river event.
Thank you very much. Would you like to take us on through the Regional Infrastructure Fund Tranche 1 business too? Thanks, Steve.
So the Tranche 1, so this is the package that we brought to council late last year. So this is the first lot of funding through the regional councils from the new batch of Regional Infrastructure Fund. So this was part of the package that was announced by Minister Jones back in the budget day of last year. So that would have been about May last year. We were successful with one of our projects we put up in that tranche. This project's got a budget of $9 million. 60% of that is funded by central government, so $5.4 million from central government. This piece of work will complete the Contour Channel works that's been going on since 2003-ish. That job started. It'll take us right up to the top of the Contour Channel up by Woodside and complete those banks and give us confidence that they're going to meet their level of service. So we've just started that work. We're well underway with Bridge 14, or it's nearly complete now actually, which is the first piece of the construction of that. Design is well underway for the flood bank construction. We've got consenting underway, talking to the landowners, looking for borroweries to find the fill, which we've now identified and need to get them consented. So we're pretty well on track for delivery. We've only got 3 years to do it in. I've now got about 2.5 left.
Thank you very much. And you've already told us earlier about the outcome of that whole Contour Channel project. Any questions for Brett about this? Councillor Neff.
Brett, how have you managed to keep things on budget and within time? Is there a secret to this, or is there good luck, good management? What's happening?
We have been tracking our budget pretty carefully and pretty closely. We're very aware, particularly with the government funded work, that they're pretty big numbers. And if we go over that budget, the risk sits with council. Government's not going to turn up with more money. So we do manage them pretty carefully. With the climate resilience work, we did move one of the pieces of work into a later stage, which we're again successful in getting government funding for. So we do manage the scope against the budget. We do track it, we keep it pretty close.
So just in terms of the team involved in doing this, is it predominantly in-house or do you use consultants? How are you doing it?
Right, so I've got myself and 2 project managers in my team, and we all work on these jobs. But there's also quite a team of consultants that are supporting us.
If I could just briefly add, Brett to either of us, Brett would be less likely to say. One is that his team are very good at what they do. And then 2, they, from what I've seen and working in infrastructure for a long time, they put a lot of effort into initial budgeting and initial estimates for what a job will take to deliver. Very good at that. And often that's where with project budgets and delivering projects to budget meets their first big hurdle. These guys are really good at forecasting, really good at spelling out upfront, even multiple years in advance, what it is likely to cost to deliver the stuff with.
Excellent. It's a really good result. You can deliver, and it sounds like you've got a really good team. So hang on to them as long as you can.
Thanks.
Kevin.
And that is really good to hear. So you're tendering out these contracts. How often do we actually review the costing of our engineering, the engineering part, so the design work and the consultants? How often do you put that out to tender and test that they and put them under pressure to deliver at a reasonable cost structure?
Yeah. So all of our setting our larger design packages we put to market.
Project by project for the large projects.
Right. So
You don't have someone on contract as such.
you haven't got Saunders
I've got to-
engineering.
I've
You've
got to
had
earn,
a
I've
pool
got
of
to earn the work project by project, so that
Yeah.
puts them under pressure to put their best foot forward and ensure their costs are good.
Correct. So if, again, using the Contour Channel as an example, the design package for that was put to market probably 6 months ago now. Sorry, I can't recall how many respondents we had, but the number of respondents and the process around it.
Yep. Keeps the pressure on. Good. Thank you.
Any further queries? I see we've got Councillor Wilson and Councillor Robertson online as well. I cannot see any other questions. Brett, anything else you really need to tell us about this?
No, I don't think so.
All done. Well, look, I think in that case, we can turn to the 2 recommendations that are: 1, we receive the report, and 2, note the progress of the RRC Climate Resilience and Regional Infrastructure tranche of the progress of those tranche 1 programs. Anyone prepared to move that? Yes, Councillor Malcolm, and a seconder, Councillor Kelleher. Is there any discussion on those recommendations? No, then let us put them. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Very well, thank you. That is passed. That's great. Thank you. We'll move on to 9.2, and it looks as though, Brett, you are staying there. 9.2 paper is safe is the review program update renewals projects. So again, we'll let you take us through that, and it's good to hear about what the actual outcomes of this work is. So over to you again, Brett.
So this paper is largely around the rest of our renewals program. So we've talked about the government funded pieces, so we excluded that out of this paper. There's quite a number of projects in here, and they are all from our long-term plan, from projects that were intended to get delivered within, or start to get delivered within year 1 of the long-term plan. I'm not going to go through them one by one because there's, I say, quite a number. Every piece of work in here has a lens of resilience to our schemes, our rivers. Be that through investigation work to understand our assets better, or straight out identification and then construction of bits that need to be renewed and fixed and improved. So again, I'll take the paper as read and have to take questions.
Councillor Webb.
I was just curious what the next steps for the Artrim project were, or if we don't know yet what the process is to getting to knowing what those next steps are.
So for the Outram feasibility, we received a draft report from our consultant on that piece of work. We are in the process of reviewing the recommendations of that at the moment, and yeah, we need to make some decisions around what those next steps are as yet.
Councillor Noon?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Brett, just looking at Silverstream capacity maintenance, are you able just to elaborate on paragraph 5? Design work is nearing completion and the tender package for the first stage of the work. Does that mean just for year one budget, or is it more than that that's being tendered, and a bit of a time frame of the expectation of that first stage being completed?
Sure. So the design work is now completed. The tender package for the construction from the Confluence up to Gladfield Road is the first package we're looking at. That's on the market now. The tender for that closes on Monday coming. The program for that is we want to get a portion of that work done before winter, and it'll be a bit dependent on when winter arrives for us and grass growing and things like that as to exactly how much we get done this season, and the range of that work will be completed in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else there? Yes, councillor Metham, and then we'll go.
Just the Leith Flood Protection Scheme, Brett, it says you've done a desktop study and looking at the scope for physical investigations, which is stage. Can you give us a heads up on what you may be looking at there, or have you started at all? I mean, where's the weakness in the flood bank system there?
So we're looking at the section for the Leith from where it meets the harbour back up to back up to the 4th Street, yeah, correct. Where the last section of work came down to. We've got some really old walls, particularly in the bottom section coming down to the harbour. They're quite deteriorated. Some of them have shifted quite a bit. There's been material lost from behind them. You suspect there's some voids and things behind those walls. So our plan around how we get to understand that better and investigate that. So we've done a piece of work to look at how those walls were originally constructed. We've dug out some old plans from the Hocking and got a good understanding of what those walls now look like. We know that there's some pretty old tiebacks and things behind those walls, connecting back to old timber posts and piles and bits and pieces and behind to hold them up. The next stage will be some physical investigation of probably the concrete work and digging some holes behind those walls to understand the condition of some of those pretty old systems and behind them. We'll be doing that probably over the next 6 months. That'll give us a good idea of, one, how fast we need to act in terms of stability of them, and where it's likely to lead us.
Because you've got the stadium there, haven't you? So
Yeah.
it's quite an asset for the city that needs to be looked after, isn't it? So
Yes. Yeah, there's a nice big expensive asset sitting behind our structure. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Kevin.
Brett, so on paragraph 17, and it's probably relevant to all our stuff, you're talking about the consenting for the construction work. Once you've done your design work and you're consenting, so do we not, for our flood protection and our bridges and everything that we've got, do we not hold a global consent that when we need to go in and do something, we can just go ahead and do it?
We do hold a global consent, but it doesn't allow us to do everything that we need to do. It's fairly restrictive at the moment. We are in the process of renewing that global consent. That's on piece of work I'm looking after.
Yep.
Which will change how we do things a bit. But we're still going to be needing to consent a lot of our work, particularly in the capital renewal space.
Just on our thing, and on Kevin, I think your sorry, your comment's more of a generic one, just noting that paragraph 17, I think there's a heritage listing involved there or a
Yeah,
historic bridge, so
yeah.
that would never be included in a
No, I
global, it
suppose
just
it's
wouldn't
not.
be possible.
Yeah.
The nature of global consents, the more you try to put in them, the more complex they are to process,
Yeah.
just by their nature. So the team and Tom and Joe are working very closely now, which has been a good shift to discuss the most efficient way to consent.
Yep.
And so that is helping the teams, Brett's team and Alex's consents team, just through that process, and hopefully we will get better outcomes in terms of the type of consenting. Obviously, a consent from ORC is treated the same as a consent from anybody that lodges one, and we would use independent planners to process those to remove any conflicts as well. But it's definitely something that we have identified as an ELT, and I know the teams have been asking for it, and Joe and Tom are working a lot more closely now to ensure we have smoother consent pathways. The global consent issue is a bit of a vexed one because it is a case of they're great in theory, they're difficult to process because you're effectively asking planners to just consent everything, which means they've got to consider everything. And you might just end up with a suite of conditions that means it would have been easier to get a consent per project. So there's the balance that Brett's team's got to think about when they go through that as well. But it's an area we knew we needed to improve in, both from an application and a processing side. And they're certainly going about that at the moment. So I'm happy with the work that they're doing in that space, and hopefully we'll start to see that in terms of how it impacts the projects and the timelines for Brett's team.
Yeah, and not the comments more around it. This is critical infrastructure that needs, may at times need to be repaired quite quickly.
Yep,
and
there's
so
always
that's
provisions for
under that
emergency
act
work
anyway.
under the RMA,
Yeah.
and so that
Sure.
that's something that we certainly would use if we needed to.
Yep, thank you.
Tim. Brett, the other one that's an interesting one, the Kaikoura Stilling Basin. Where is that exactly? What part? Where of the river are we talking about there?
So that's right next to the Southern Motorway. So if you're familiar with Green Island, the pedestrian overbridge that crosses the motorway at that point, under that bridge.
I've had a look at some of the work that Roha Kaikoura Valley are doing there with a lot of the plantings and things like that. In terms of the sort of infrastructure work, or the sort of work you're doing here, do you sort of meet with those groups and sort of we had some input from them?
We haven't as yet for this project, but we intend to.
Yes.
Yeah. There's Kaikoura Valley particularly is a really good opportunity for some of that engagement.
Yeah. It's a real compromised river, that one. It's, if there was a project that was a Rolls-Royce project, it would be that one, I would think. So just to tidy it up and to get all the bring it back to natural if we could, it'd be great. It's just one.
Yeah, just there's a very good picture of a very good bridge that we apparently own on page 23, which will be ideal for someone's cat to get over, but not much else. So I'm just sort of wondering, what are we doing with that sort of structure on our books, and what is the plan to get it off our books? And how much money are we actually spending? I see there's a $600,000 review cost or something. How much we actually, how do we get rid of those?
So there's always a bit of discussion with the landowner in these cases.
Right.
These bridges were put there because of our drainage network, so they're providing access across our drainage network for the landowners.
Yep. That
particular bridge in that photo is one that's clearly not being used at the moment. We've got a number of them. There will be a process to have that discussion with the landowner as to whether or not we can just dispose of that asset.
Yep. And
there's a number that are like that. Some will need to repair, some will need to replace, and some will look to dispose of.
Yeah. And I suppose taking the common analogy on a farm, the gate that hasn't worked for 50 years and never has, as soon as you say you're going to remove it or do something with it, all of a sudden it becomes valuable. So I just wouldn't like us to get into, because clearly that hasn't been used for quite some time either. So clearly we haven't had a use for it. Farmer hasn't had a use for it. So I'd sort of, wonder that the discussions weren't going down a track where we had to spend considerable amount of money to replace that, which it would be. Yeah, that will be interesting. So you're going to give us a report on all those structures. When is that coming? Is that, oh, that's part of the project scoping, the 13 bridges. So that's, again, on page 22, you've got sort of 4 phases there. Which is year 1, 100K, year 2, 250K, year 3, 250K. I suppose that's just the actually repairing those. That's actually just doing the process of assessing it.
Yeah, so that's the way the budget's laid out within the long-term plan.
Yep.
And the intention behind how that's been laid out is that in that first year, we need to do quite a lot of work in terms of investigating the bridges that we do decide to do some repairs and upgrades to. We'll look to get them into the design phase. And then the bigger money sitting out in the later years for any construction work that needs to happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gary.
Thanks. Brett, just going back to the Kaikoura Stilling Basin, just to clarify that the work that's proposed there is all to do with remedial to the asset. It's so the sort of stream issues and the upstream and downstream and other sort of concerns that are sitting with the stream longitudinally are not really part of what's happening here. That money is being spent purely on remedial work for the asset.
So at this stage, the Kaikoura job is in the very early stages of scoping. So our next piece of work for that is to get some ecology work done, to get some structural analysis work done, and understand what conditions we're dealing with there better. Before we leap to what our options are, we'll need to go through a process of scoping that out, understanding the direction we want to go, and probably bringing those sorts of decisions back to council as to whether or not we do some relatively simple repairs to the existing structures. We've probably been past it in this case, or whether we look to do, bigger work within the stream to, as an example, look to return it back to something a bit more natural.
Right, so those wider sort of more further afield outside of the asset options could potentially be on the table within that budget.
Yeah, there's a number of options there that we will look at, and we'll come back to council with the direction as to which way we want to go.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think best way to think about that is this one of those jobs where we have the opportunity to look at different ways of achieving the same function rather than dealing with the form or dealing with how that asset has operated in the past and just trying to reinstate that. This is a good opportunity to look a bit more broadly and just make sure that we, one, achieve the same outcomes that that asset was intended to achieve, but we could potentially do it in a slightly different way, maybe slightly more sensitive to the environment, slightly cheaper perhaps in terms of engineering. We'll go work through that process.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, look, it's very good to hear about that. There's a whole lot of work on the go, and as we can see there, a whole lot of investigations to be done to work out the best ways to doing things before we jump into any immediate work. I don't see any other questions coming from anybody. Nothing else, Brett or Tom, you had to say? So the recommendations are that we receive this report and note the progress of the Otago Regional Council of the ORC Engineering Renewals Program. Do I have someone prepared to move that? Thank you, Councillor Kelleher, and a seconder, Councillor Weir. Anyone need to speak to that? No, by the look of it. So let's put those recommendations. All those in favour? Right. Aye. Against? So that is passed as well. Thank you very much, Brett, for reporting on that and all that work.
Thank you very much.
So we move.
We got Tom.
Tom.
Can I just suggest that we make a quick agenda change? Jean-Luc's not yet here.
All right.
We've moved through things a bit more quickly than but we have got Anne, should we be able to pick up the Delta work?
Right. Do I need to formally move that? Well, let's do it. So we're suggesting let's deal with paper 9.4 now and then come back to paper 9.3. Oh, do I need to? Yeah, so I propose that change, a second, councillor Weir, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Right, thanks, thank you, that was a good idea, thank you, Tom. So we'll move on to 9.4, which is the Clutha Delta Natural Hazards Adaptation. And we are welcoming Anne Conroy and Tom Dyer up to the front. So this is to update council on progress with the Clutha Delta Natural Hazards Adaptation Program, including natural hazards assessments, program and engagement planning. So we'll hand over to you two. Tell us about that.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, so we want to give you an update on the Clutha Delta program. We haven't given you an update in about 6 months, so it's a good opportunity to do so. So we have moved and progressed a number of the natural hazard investigations. In addition, we've also, because we had the flood event in October of 24, we've been collecting some additional flood intelligence to help us to understand that particular event. And so, and then we also have updates on the various natural hazard investigations we have going on. So in regards to the October 24 event, so that was quite a significant event in the Clutha area, and there was a lot of widespread flooding, particularly in the scheme. So we have did engage NIWA to have a look at the significance of that event and to analyse all the data from the rainfall stations and also from the rain radar. So they had a look at that. So they basically characterised the event so that we could understand its significance at different locations. So it was a significant event for longer durations, so from Nugget Point to Dunedin. So in that case, the return periods exceeded 50 years, so quite a rare event for those longer return periods. So those are the like 24 to 72 hours, so quite, the longer durations. For Balclutha and the Clutha Delta, the findings were that it was significant total accumulation, so some stations had more than 120 millimetres over that period, and there was also the Inchclutha station received 100 millimetres of rain in a 12-hour period, which is quite significant, and over 187 millimetres total for the weather event. So that was basically that, for the Clutha area, it was those longer durations greater than 24 hours that were quite significant for the area. So that's so there's some maps and tables in there with that information. We also were investigating some newer types of flood intelligence. That the one available that we chose to purchase some information is from ISI Limited and their New Zealand partner, which is Eagle Technology. And this is satellite-derived flood extent and depth information. So this is relatively new for us. We haven't had this before. So we looked at whether it might be useful and purchased a data set to also look at, whether it has future value for other events. So basically it's from synthetic aperture radar, so it can see through the clouds from satellite radar, and which is handy because some of our other ways of collecting post-event or during an event, the extent of a flood is limited obviously by weather and, can you put a drone up and things like that. So this is not dependent on the weather, can see through the clouds. And so it basically captures 12-hourly intervals through a weather event and then is compiled together. So it's snapshots compiled, making a flood extent and depth information from that compiled data set. So it doesn't show the exact measurement of flood depth or extent, but it complements our other data that we have. So for the Clutha data set, for the Clutha Delta area, so it illustrated the very wide occurrence of surface ponding and flooding. So the floodwaters were generally relatively shallow, but over a wide extent, as you can see in figure 6. And so that, matched up well with the observations that we were receiving from the field, and from others. So there were generally relatively shallow floodwaters, but some locations were deeper, particularly along the western edge of the delta. It wasn't, the flooding wasn't sourced from the Clutha River, because the Clutha River was still within the flood banks. And so it was basically sourced from total rainfall accumulation onto the ground and inflows from local tributaries. So that's the ISI data set. So the map on figure 5, actually we have more than those areas. It goes all the way up to Palmerston and into Middlemarch and Upper Tyree and things. So it's fairly complete for that event. In terms of the flood hazard in terms of the natural hazard investigations that we have ongoing at the moment, the flood hazard assessment, we're doing that in-house, hydraulic modelling with our in-house expertise. The liquefaction hazard assessment, Tonkin and Taylor, in November, they finished the additional geotechnical CBT tests that they were conducting out on the Delta. And those were to supplement the data that we'd already had available from other previous investigations. So we're making use of the previous investigations, filling in some gaps with some additional CBT tests, and those are all in hand now. And so they're basically in the process of producing a phase 1 report and that will include the liquefaction vulnerability characterization across the Delta. And then phase 2 is a qualitative risk assessment. So that'll feed in together. So that should all be delivered by mid-25, so middle of this year. In response to there's very strong community interest in Clutha bed levels around Balclutha. There's a concern from the community that the bed levels are building up and that might increase flood risk. So we're engaged NIWA to have a look at all of the historical data all the way back. So been down in the archive digging out all the cross sections data, and so NIWA has all that data and is just about to report on the trends and its potential impact on flood hazard. And so we'll be able to report that back to the community once we've presented the findings to yourselves. The last one is relating to the Coal Mouth and Pruitt investigation. This has had a couple of small variations also because the conditions changed post October 2024 flood event. So the work has had to adjust to cope with the new conditions. But the work is also informing some of those emergency design works for the training line. But we're still proposing that we will have the results for that also sort of mid 2025. And we want to give you an update on the program plan. So that's in table 3. And what we're proposing, as we discussed previously, is that we've got some focus areas that we will work towards, and in the initial version of the adaptation strategy, and then we can, over time, if we need to, add in other focus areas over time in the long-term plan. So the first iteration for those initial focus areas would be mid-27. And we basically would be proposing to present, as we have done previously for Head of the Lake program, would be presenting findings to yourselves and then going out to the community to talk them through with the implications with the community following. That's the sort of timeline. So that would approximately need to be out in the community about every 6 months in order to present all the information and to work through it together. So are there any questions about any of that?
Thank you very much. There's a lot of information there. Yes, we've got Councillor Wilson online with a question. Kate.
Kia ora. Look, there's 2 questions. I'm going to do the easy one first. When I look at this information, and it relates to the next paper, which was going to be before this, and I was going to ask it there, but it probably makes more sense to do it now. Would we have been in a better position to understand this if we had more monitoring of either rainfall or flows?
Do you mean with regards to the October 2024 event?
Yep. Because
Um,
when you look at what I think's figure 3, and I'm finding it difficult to sort of understand all of this, but we've got some rainfall gauges, but there's not heaps on the coast, or is that flow data? Either or, when you look at the maps, and maybe I'm better. If I'm better to ask this question in the next one, let me know.
No, that's fine. Yeah, broadly, more data is always handy, but it obviously always comes at a cost as well. What we are finding is that more and more, especially on the coast, we're able to rely on some of the rain radar derived totals and information that's coming through as well, and that's a tool that in the past, we've used for during event management, but more and more we're learning that that it's actually quite a reliable tool for calculating totals in quite specific areas, and really does calibrates quite nicely with our rain gauge network, and obviously that's really low cost relative to having many more gauges set up around the network. So yes, you're right. More data is always good, but it comes at a cost, and we're also, like, as we move through these types of events and as technology evolves, we are better equipped than ever in terms of being able to assess these events and their impacts, certainly during event and post as well.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, and I just want to check this because I think it is important that we. Oh, there's actually 2 questions, but the first one is. When Anne was talking about figure 6, and it was a wee while ago, I think she made the statement correctly, is my understanding, that the Clutha didn't overflow the banks, and therefore most of the flooding was direct from rainfall. That wouldn't be the case for the Puarua, would it? And I think the flooding, well, I just want to check this because that picture shows flooding in the Puarua, which my understanding was overtopping of the banks.
Yeah, no, you're correct, Kate. So the main scheme is set up to the primary hazard that it's looking to manage is flooding from the Clutha, big river, and then the scheme also deals with secondary rivers, Puarua being one of them. And yes, you're right, Puarua River did overtop flood banks in a number of locations, and you can see that if you're looking at figure 6, you can see you can see on the left-hand side of the mapped area, you can see a purple line. That purple line's a flood bank, and then either side of that flood bank, you've got extensive flooding. That was derived from the upper Puarua catchment, as well as the rainfall that fell on the delta area as well. It's but yeah, it's not a big river, but obviously in this event did respond quite extreme.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's just that I think that's an important bit to note in that picture, and I just want to make sure that came out. The black. Then my last question is the black line right round this. I think is the Otago flood hazard. That is what I'm taking from figure 6.
That's correct.
Does that relate to the rating area? And I'm only going to flag, so I don't want to go into a whole lot of depth, is that it is clear that we've got my understanding from that area is that we've got to do some work on the flood rating area. Does that, and how that relates to the flood hazard area?
You're correct, it doesn't line up perfectly with the current rating areas. The rating areas extend into the hills and some parts of the catchment. But yes, you're right, we are due to do a review of the rating zones and rating model for the lower Clutha scheme.
And what's the time frame for that?
We are getting started at the moment, and I would expect we'll be able to provide results from that review or results for decisions as we move through LTP.
So okay. We're intending to do future rate reviews, including this one and the other flood schemes, separate to any of the long-term plan processes. So we would expect to bring it back to this table over the next year effectively, or 18 months, enable the
Right.
consultation process and then have decisions made to feed into the next LTP process.
Brilliant. That's I'm delighted to hear both of that, and I think it's just helpful to have that tabled if anyone is listening in, and that's why I've raised those issues. I will speak during the debate on other matters. Thank you.
Andrew, and then Tim, and then Kim.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether the question's for Anne or Tom, but paragraphs 33 to 36, where the reference is made about an updated riverbed level assessment, and you mentioned, Anne, about NIWA's involvement, etc. My question is around paragraph 35, where it says 14 surveys from 94 to 24. So historically, we've had surveys every couple of years. My question really is around, does it coincide with or follow a flood event when these surveys are done, or is there a sort of a routine every couple of years, or have I analysed that in the wrong way? I'm just trying to understand why we've got to the position where the community is saying, okay, we're concerned, and then we've engaged NIWA to provide a riverbed level assessment. Obviously, our monitoring regime gives us a certain amount of data. NIWA will give us that, but more like a deep dive. So yeah, it's
Hopefully deep.
excuse me.
Yeah, Steve, it is quite complicated, of course, because, you know, post events, the sediment moves around with depending on how much flow you've got in the river. So things do move about. We also have to, you know, work out whether we need another survey, you know, post. We had done a survey before the flood last, before the October 24 flood, which in the Clutha was not a particularly high flow, but we just have to investigate whether we need to do that again as well. But yes, we do it regularly. Do you want to provide any comment on that, John Luke?
Morning, everyone, and apology for lateness. Yeah, so we do cross-section survey after events, large events. We also have a program of resurvey roughly every 5 years. And for the Clutha, because of that public concern with the gravel, we've done survey on a more regular basis. And the work that NIWA is doing, it's not like we've done nothing before. We've done analysis even last year. And that was showing that the basically where you've got aggradations, they're going up. On the other end of the cross section, it's going down. So in average, it's not changing the conveyance capacity. But we thought because of the lower Clutha or the Clutha Delta work, it's a good time now to have a more in-depth look to that issue. And this will inform the flood hazard modeling that we are also currently doing. So it's just a timing where we think it's the right time now, given the progress of the program and other components we're progressing, that to have NIWA look into this issue in a bit more focus.
Excellent, thank you.
Tim.
Just interested in the Koau mouth and the flood event 2024. It was you've got here was breached. Any idea? I've got a couple of questions. Any idea around the extent of the damage and the indication of cost of repairs for that at the moment?
Yes, something we've presented on December this year and covered off in detail. Largely the numbers are still the same. So we're looking at about sort of $1.2 to $1.5 million to repair that breach. The breach occurred adjacent to a number of existing culverts that provide an artificial mouth for the Porirua River to move into the Clutha just before the mouth of the Koau mouth. Those culverts were investigating replacement of them, sizing of them, all of that sort of stuff prior to the event, and it had been moving forward. And briefly talked to the flood studies that have been occurring in the area. already. There was fortunately a hydraulic model built, all of that sort of stuff. So we were well equipped with information, and we're on a pathway towards having to invest in replacing or at least altering that pipe structure setup anyway. When the failures occurred, it's opened up a roughly 60-metre wide hole in the training line, which conveniently is sufficiently sized to place new pipes and to work through that. So what we've done is taken the opportunity to use that breach and the breach repair as a platform for installing pipes that will create greater capacity for future flood events and will optimise levels and a few other bits and pieces to ensure that we learn a bit from the or that we gain a bit in terms of performance for future events.
Yeah, and you've got also in paragraph 38 that of the report that you've completed A and B, understanding coastal processes, coastal erosion, and modelling and drainage performance studies. Does any of that modelling sort of suggest that you could be fighting a losing battle with the infrastructure that's there? So that's the first question. And when would you be considering natural solutions around that mouth? It's the same question I probably asked in December.
Yeah, I think this process is about assessing exactly those matters. So following all of the modelling does indicate a range of future challenges in terms of both the coastal results and the hydraulic results. But this process is set up to use that information as well as information from community and liquefaction information and a more holistic picture to be able to then properly make informed decisions around what future interventions might look like, be they naturalisation of areas or infrastructure changes.
Yeah, certainly. And if we continue to have more weather events and more flooding of the Clutha, then you certainly don't want to have to be up for $1.5 million of repair every single time because of the breach of that training line.
While we're talking about this, could you update us about recent community engagement around the Pu'u River?
Certainly. So we presented council with a paper in December covering off a plan to reinstate the training line. That included updates on procurement for pipes and a decision in terms of civil contractor procurement. So the intent was to get into that work as quickly as possible. In terms of doing the right thing and meeting the community, we met with them shortly after that meeting to give an update on our intent and seek feedback on that intent. We got quite strong feedback that they'd like a couple of things considered. So we took those two things away. The two things were the perception within the community is that since the event and since the breach, they had a better drainage performance for those low-lying farms in the area. So their view was our drainage network and their internal drainage networks were operating better under the new tidal regime. So the breach was allowing more water out through low tides and more water in through high tides, but the lower lows were enabling better drainage. So we said we would do two things with that information. We'd go away and have a look at our design and proposal for how we reinstate the training line and whether or not we could achieve any of that optimisation through changing of pipe levels or sizing or whatever. So we did that and that took a little while. And the other thing that they really wanted to understand was levels of risk. I think that first meeting we were probably speaking in summary terms around the risk to the broader scheme of leaving that hole in place, the risk to the remaining assets that were in place at that site, the risk of Clutha mouth migration, all of that sort of stuff. And the feedback we got generally is that you talked about risk, but you don't understand it, and we don't understand it enough to kind of buy it. So we took that information away as well. So we commissioned a short risk report, which we delivered internally. We delivered the summary report internally, but we brought in a range of experts to undertake a workshop collectively and consider those risks and document them. So we went through that process and finalised the report mid-Feb. We also went back to some additional modelling and found that if we dropped the level of the pipes to where the bed level is at the moment, that we could achieve better hydraulic performance in terms of those tidal ranges, so therefore better, in theory, better drainage network performance long term. So we took that information, we took those two bits of information back to the community on Monday this week, and largely that was received really well by the community. We kind of filled the information gaps and provided them with an opportunity to kind of see where we're coming from. And yeah, it's positive me. There's sort of certainly there was no collective objections to us continuing with the work. We'll look to begin construction, I think, on the 25th of this month. So we will get the work done before winter as intended.
Thanks, Tom. That's really helpful. And I think this discussion sort of indicates that we're dealing with both the long-term plans here, but also having to deal with the immediate short-term after those recent flood events. We are going to Kevin.
It's Tom, Jean-Luc, and I'm just struggling. What I'm really struggling with is the work on the gravel levels of the Clutha River, and that we're now getting someone else in to look at that. And it's probably around, we've got 30 years of data, which is probably in science world not too bad. We're told that the longer we have it, we should be able to sort some trends and different stuff about. So why in fact are we having to use someone else? And from this, by bringing someone else in, will we actually be assessing the value of us having those 13 sites and using those 13 sites? So to me, it sounds as though, looking at it, we've done all this monitoring, but we actually haven't used that information to create. It hasn't created what we actually need to do to tell the public now. So are we actually doing that right? Or are we underestimating? Are we actually underestimating the knowledge that we have gained from that? And we should be able to give that answer. I'm not knocking what you're doing. I'm just sort of saying, that to me, that seems to be, we should be able to say to the community, well, we've watched this for the last 30 years, and it's not Murray Grant walking down from his house up the road and saying, well, I think it's different. In fact, we've got the facts here already. So
Yeah, that's what we've been reporting in the last few years. We've been taking those cross-section surveys and doing the in-house the analysis and reporting back to the community saying that's not affecting the conveyance, the flow capacity of the Clutha in that area. But we still get people concerned by this. So the purpose of having a NIWA is also to have that external independent view on what we're doing. Now, in terms of are the cross-section appropriate, those are historic cross-sections. It's kind of quite important to keep surveying the same location. But what we've done recently for that investigation that NIWA is doing, we've done bathymetric LiDAR, which is a new way to capture bed levels and moving away from lines, but capturing an area. So have the information between the lines, between each cross-section. And we think this is going to be a more comprehensive way to look at gravel issues in that part of the Clutha. By having a baseline and doing this kind of survey, the bathymetric survey, every few years.
Right.
Can I just add a couple of things?
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Look, I think at a broad level, the team have taken the results of those survey trends and that information back to the community a couple of times in the last little while. That information hasn't been hasn't been sufficient to quell some of the concerns within the community. So one tool to do that is to bring in an additional expert or additional point of view and say, well, look, here's what we provided before. This was the information. Me, we're about to look at it now, and they also think the same thing, or they think something different. So that's one way to help to try and move the conversation forward and try and get some resolution with the community and some understanding within the community. The other thing is we're moving to a process now as described in the statement that's pretty significant, right? This is something you don't do often. You don't go through a process to fully review your schemes, how your communities interact with your schemes, the level of service they receive, the level of service they're likely to receive into the future very often. So I'd say when you're coming up to a big milestone like this, it's often good to test yourself by bringing in an external for a worldview that's objective and comes from people from outside of the business. And so we do that in the natural hazard space, we do that in the science space. So the state and trends report that we did prior to the land and water plan was largely informed by consultant work as well, as a way to provide some objective impartiality in terms of the data that we've collected over a really long period of time. The idea being too that, again, moving towards a significant decision, we just invest a little bit more and bring in a little bit more horsepower or a slightly different way of looking at things to inform both our community in terms of their next steps and you guys in terms of decision making.
So, sorry, if I because Karen, so at the end of that process, regardless of that, is I can understand why you're doing it. So, will that, will that lead to a change in the way we do it if the new method is the better method?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. And so we'd drop doing the old way and would go to the new method and if that is the,
Everything we do, we consider improvements anytime.
Cool. Yeah.
Kate, you had your hand up, but it's down. Did you have something you need to ask, or was that been answered? Don't hear a response.
Sorry, unmute button wasn't unmuted.
Yeah.
Apologies. Look, I just wanted to clarify, and the training line here, and to ensure that everyone understands, is providing that its absence is providing potentially a benefit to the drainage, but it's there for the flood risk for people further up the Clutha. I've got that right, haven't I? So this is an interesting distinction from, say, the Taieri, where the flood and drainage benefit the same people generally. Here, the drainage and the flood are quite distinct benefits and conflicting.
Yeah, that's correct, Kate. So effectively the landowners on the flanks of the Puirua River are protected by small flood banks that look after that river, and they're also protected by the flood scheme from the Clutha. The training line's there to manage the Clutha and the Clutha mouth. The level of service it provides is effectively keeping the mouth open. It keeps the channel there all the time. But it's a big structure, it pokes out into the sea, it's a hiding day in, day out from the sea and the river. But it effectively blocks the mouth of the Puirua River, other than a few pipes. And
yep.
those so it can be a hindrance to a Puirua River flood, but provides a really important level of service in terms of managing the wider Clutha scheme, which is obviously a much bigger river, much bigger risk to the wider area.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Gary.
Thank you. The Roxburgh Dam silt flushing. Do we have an understanding of the impact that has in the reach below that right down? Is that exacerbator to this situation?
So when we did the coastline erosion study a few years ago. That was cited as one, the sediment supply and lack of sediment coming from Rockford was taken as one source explaining some of the erosion, but it's not the only one.
But it is a contributor that will reach a point where if it's contributing, then there will be a build-up, or it will be otherwise, if that wasn't there or wasn't happening, then the river would naturally do something different.
Yeah, look, I don't fully understand the sediment dynamics of the river, and the attraction and all that sort of stuff. But my understanding is there's significant levels of sediment behind both Clyde Dam and Roxburgh Dam, and that to the point where Contact Energy refer to that sediment build-up largely being responsible for the kind of end of life of those dams, and or their kind of biggest risk in terms of end of life of those dams and the service they provide. But they do some sediment flushing. I guess what we can take from that is that downstream of the Roxburgh Dam, there's likely to be less sediment in the system than there would normally be without dam conditions, and that with sediment flushing, we're likely to see a little bit more sediment introduced to the system, but probably still not to levels that would have been prior to dam construction. But that's something that we need to kind of continue to understand, and whether or not the more recent changes to sediment flushing regimes and all of that sort of stuff is actually having an impact, or we are seeing greater sediment level build up downstream, and that's something that this 30-year trench stuff should pick up if it is moving one way or another.
I guess it's just that, so are we saying that in those cross-sectional surveys that we have been doing in our flow gauging and what we're understanding of our bed parameters at the moment, that the sediment that's there isn't overly building up, it's just moving around? Is that?
Yeah, correct.
But as it moves around, because what I observe in flow management is that it moves around, but often it will worsen in points of, and it creates a problem somewhere else, that while it's moving, it will tend to be just exacerbating one point and worsening another. And for the community down there who rely on those flood banks and any compromise to the performance of those flood banks, it will reach a point where an intervention is going to be needed to reset that situation.
And that's the reason why we're also doing that hydraulic analysis, scheme performance, see how with the current configuration of the bed, what is the capacity of the channel in that part, and what this means in terms of level of protection. So that's being taken into account, part of that hydraulic modeling that is currently underway. Right. There are challenges with that because it's a very dynamic system. So you have to make some scenarios around the cross-section and sediment movement, but that's something. It's one of the main driver for that hydraulic study, is to understand the level of service of the scheme, and are we still achieving that? And if not, what are the intervention we need to do to make sure we're achieving this, whether it's sediment removal or flood bank topping. This will come later on.
Right. Yep.
I guess one of the good things about the Clutha tool is that you get a reasonable flow reasonably regularly. And so one of the assessments that the guys make is, if there is a build up in any one place, then if we do get a flood event, how likely is that sediment to move and change? And, is it, because the sediment's always there, right? It's just where it's placed. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's, sometimes you get a nice flat bed covered by water, so no one sees it. So the team make an assessment of whether or not any build-up that's visible is likely to stay there and therefore continue scheme performance changes during an event. And the answer typically for the finer sediments that we see down there is that they'll move. So when we get a flood, they'll move and they'll shift downstream, and therefore are unlikely to cause significant scheme challenges. So we make decisions because it's expensive to get plant into a river and to move things around. It's also pretty intrusive ecologically. So we make calculated decisions based on all of those factors. But there is, so more recently, the river flow has been pretty low, and is a good kind of technical example of exactly what you're talking about. So that sediment buildup is potentially causing more water at the moment to go down the Kauai branch of the river rather than down past Sealing. And we've had calls recently from CDC saying, hey, we're just noticing slightly lower levels at our intake for the drinking water plant at Stirling. Can you come and have a look at flow dynamics and have a think about that and see whether there's anything you do? And look, the reality is that there is something we can do. If there's some slight bed alterations that we can undertake to just get a bit more water through there, then we'll do that.
Great. And that community concern that's obviously being raised, like it's great we're doing some external work to back up what we do, but we are taking that to the level of seriousness that we would hope it would be taken to, because those people are there, they're observing it every day. They often are even though it might not be an engineeringly informed position, but they see those changes every day, and so it is valuable.
100%. It's the right thing for us to do is to work through problems in a way that helps our community to understand them and builds trust in the judgments that are made in terms of managing the scheme, but builds trust in the organisation as well. And in this case, we think the right thing to do is to bring in some independent advice.
And we would have enough expertise sitting within our science team to be able to look at, if flushing of the dams or if you look at the shot over and flood versus what then happens behind Lake Dunstan, what happens behind the Roxburgh Dam, then flushing and the timing of flushing and how, because it always is happening in flood and the dams are the impediment for that. So we would be able to undertake our own analysis around the timings, and maybe look at what we do into the future that may try and minimise what might have an impact on those, our precious flood scheme.
I think we absolutely have the skills. Sometimes it comes down to capacity, like that job you're describing there can be a big one if you're undertaking a kind of refresh in totality. So sometimes when we're in a capacity position, we don't hold resource for significant high volume work periods, and often we'll bring in consultants to cover that kind of stuff as well. Or sometimes where the applications of that type of work might have applications for Contact Energy or something like that, we might go and work with them and agree to work through a study with another supplier that we both kind of work with and trust. So it just comes down to what the purpose of that study might be. We do have the skills to be able to achieve that kind of work, but we've also got a full work program as well. So it would just be a judgment call at the time when we're undertaking it.
But we can contact are doing that if they're purposely looking to flush silt. They'd communicate that with us, and then we would have the people sitting in house to be able to say, hey, no, don't do it now, time for whatever. Or is that level of interaction undertaken between us and Contact?
So the flushing is controlled by consent conditions, and we have a flood management plan that Contact Energy has shared with us. So that tells how the dams are operated for different levels, and how the flushing works within that framework. I don't think operationally we can just say to Contact not to do things if it's within their consent conditions. So all that flushing is being assessed and studied part of the consenting process, and they arrive with a regime of flushing that is agreed on.
With respect, though, in a consenting process, you're doing that you're applying for consent, you are proffering forward what you're going to do, and at that time you're doing the best consideration and an assessment of, okay, these will be the impacts. But if we are observing, well, I'm not saying that we are, but if we were, we would have every ability to go back to them and say, hey, this isn't working, or this is having an impact on how we are protecting Balclutha at the moment. So this needs to change, or can we do something different?
So I think that's what I've observed is there is a very good relationship between our team and the contact team in terms of how they manage it. My understanding is that the impact of the flushing are far more of an ecological nature than they are of a flood scheme nature. It's the sediment in the system is not of significant amounts that it would cause us concerns in that area. It is in terms of its impact, and we get issues raised from Fish and Game, for example, at times of flushing because of the impact that can have. If we were concerned, I'm very confident that Contact would come to the table and have that conversation with us, because they would not want to be doing anything that was going to result in detrimental impact to our flood management downstream of their schemes. And we're in constant contact through the flood duty officer and their team who are managing dams during periods of high rain events. So the relationship's very good, and I'm very confident if there was a suggestion that their program that is currently consented was having a detrimental impact on our ability to manage flood safety in Balclutha, a good example, they would be very willing participants in a conversation about that. I just don't think that's the case at the moment.
Right, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Weir, did you have a question earlier?
Sorry.
No, you're all good. Okay, well, maybe our last one, Councillor Malcolm, as we've interrogated this paper pretty well.
Yeah, just probably as a couple. If a weather event goes through, does NIWA, as a matter of course, so if RRC wasn't here, a matter of course, do an assessment of that weather event and tell the public the characteristics of that weather event?
I think no is the short answer. Sometimes they choose to, and you might see some social media based on an event, but they can choose. When it comes to if you want specific advice about a specific event, you have to ask.
Yeah, and so that's why you've couched that in that way. We just so they can't wait another week and it's going to appear anyway.
Yeah, they've also got a range of very good tools that that make this work very easy and cost effective.
Yeah, and just one final one on, and we haven't really touched liquefaction. And again, this goes to probably assessing our responsibility as opposed to a TA's and a local community. We've under 27, we've engaged Tonkin Taylor doing the liquefaction, a greater assessment of the Delta and the Balclutha Township, whereas I sort of understood that it was up to us to identify a hazard. So the cost of that part, should that not rest with the TA and the community, as opposed to the whole of? And again, we've already done that liquefaction work up Glenorchy and the like. It's just, you know, where do we start charging the locals as opposed to the whole of the province? And is this not a duplication of that? We've identified it, so now you handle it. I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, but I'm just saying that balance is who pays and when we should. Yeah.
Yeah, so that work that Tonkin and Taylor is doing is still the work that Tonkin and Taylor is doing is still in the investigation and identification phases. So we want to get a bit more detail around liquefaction for that specific area for the Clutha Delta. What we have currently for the area is coming from a regional scale assessment, but it's not enough really for us as managing infrastructure, the schemes, and also the TAs to make decision about the next steps with this information.
Yeah, and
that's usually how we are funded in natural hazard. So the investigation is usually general funded.
I think the thing I add to that is like Glenorchy, we're moving through a process here to make a considered assessment of the long-term investment in a flood scheme. Now, a big part of flood scheme and this particular flood scheme anyway is that there's a significant, there's an identified liquefaction hazard in the same area. And so when you've got multiple hazards and you're looking to have a conversation about what the long-term infrastructure plan looks like, what the long-term level of service looks like for big areas of land. It's also really useful to have a bit of detailed information or more detailed information around liquefaction. And I think John rightly identified that this is one area where we've got that regional assessment. But as we move through a process like this, it's really useful to have a bit of more detailed information, because that regional assessment isn't, doesn't get to that location specific or property specific level of detail, whereas this work will get us much closer to that.
Yeah. And Alan, just following on from an email that you sent to us about insurance people having a crack at things, I'm just wondering, have we a list of our flood banks or our scheme infrastructure that is performing or not performing to the level of service that they are designed to be at? And
Those, yes, is the short answer. That's an ongoing process, though. Obviously, our performance changes with time, asset deterioration, all that sort of stuff. So we're constantly monitoring and updating that information.
yeah, and we have aligned with that a plan to rectify any underperformance in those assets.
Yeah, 100%. So anything that's sits outside of an acceptable level of risk gets moved through to an investigation, and that's where it moves into the Brett's team and the work program Steve's shown you before.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thanks. And I think this sort of just all this discussion.
Happy to move.
Just indicates in a complex area like this with lots of things going on, how interconnected everything is. And Tom, you highlighted that by pointing out that liquefaction information actually has such important implications for the flood scheme and the infrastructure there. So it's not just disconnected stuff, it's all very much connected stuff. Now, Kevin, thank you. The recommendation is that we note this report. Kevin has moved that. Is the Secretary Councillor Noon? Kevin, would you like to speak to this first?
Yeah, look, just very quickly, thanks for the report. Really appreciate the detail and really appreciate the feedback from the questions. It's an exceptionally important area. People are relying on these systems, and it's great to see that we have got, and I knew the answer to my last question. I just wanted to have that out publicly, that we have got a really good system that we're working on to ensure that if they're not performing to their specifications, we've got a really good program to ensure that they do. So well done, keep the good work up and keep bringing them in on time and under cost. Thank you, well done.
Okay.
Kia ora. Look, I just wanted to embellish on the meeting in on Monday with the drainage people at the Purua, and I think Tom has probably undersold the impact he had there, and in the sense that was a meeting of people who were keenly interested in drainage improvements, and wanted to ensure that the drainage worked for them, and were delighted to an extent with the training wall being open. The fact is that Tom had to tell them, despite their keenness, he was going to change that, hopefully improve it, but for the flood risk, he couldn't deliver what they wanted. Despite all of that, and the presentation was such that he got a clap at the end of the meeting. And that just shows that the staff are really working, listening, and not necessarily delivering exactly what every person wants, but their way of being able to listen and articulate what was needed. They appreciated him having listened. They still want some follow-up work, but his modesty, I don't think, allowed him to say that is the first meeting he's ever been clapped at for not delivering what they wanted. So I just wanted to relay that because I think it's important.
Thank you, Kate. That's great to have that perspective on it. Thank you. Anyone need anything else to say? Looks all good. So let's put that recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? All pass. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Anne, for your role in that. I think Tom and John Luke are staying up there. So our last paper we're considering today is 9.3. To describe the flood warning system and service provided by the Otago Regional Council. The ODT picked this information up in the paper yesterday. was good, and it seems to me actually it's an excellent example of the work that ORC is doing to enhance the safety of the people of Otago. So we will hear from you two, and then we'll see what questions we have. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to take maybe 3 minutes to introduce the paper, and my introduction will be based on 3 questions. So what the service is, first one, who uses the service and what are the steps to deliver the service? First question, the purpose really, that's to provide flood warning and flood risk information to enable a safe and timely response. So the paper is really about the flood warning part of the ORC response to a flood, but an ORC response to a flood event or heavy rainfall event is wider than just the flood warning. We've got the engineering team, for example, doing a lot of work in preparation of flood event and during a flood event around flood stream and rivers. And we also have the civil defense and emergency management team very active prior and during an event. But this paper is really around the information that we take from different sources, how we add our understanding and experience and provide that in a timely and clear way to those users. So who uses the service? First users are internal. We provide this information for the engineering team. For example, they need this to understand the consequence of a heavy rainfall event on the road tariff protection scheme. For example, they need to operate some infrastructure, spillways, for example, and they need to make key decisions. So we give that forecast of consequence early on, depending on the scale of the event. The other internal user, the other example is civil defense. They need this information to start informing the public, raising awareness, and also planning for a response. But there are also external users, general public, communities, needing this information to make their own decision around preparedness, around preparing their asset, infrastructure, properties, but also making sure they are safe and taking the steps toward that. And it's not only people from Otago using this information. I think there are people crossing the region or wanting to use the road network that will benefit from this service. So how we achieve this? We've got in the paper I've described 4 activities, and that's going from collecting the information relevant for a specific event, mainly weather information, and also what the state of the rivers and lakes are in the region, and moving into the second stage, which is doing the forecast, trying to turn this weather information into forecasted flows, forecasted level, and more importantly, what this means on the ground. So explaining as much as we can that if we have that amount of rain, it will cause this river to overtop, and this will mean this area will flood to some level. And the last step is really making sure the information is sent out appropriately and can be used. To achieve this, we've got a team that operate 24-hour, 7-day roster. We've got a very motivated, dedicated team that does that. So on a day like today, we have someone on call making sure we do those assessment, not only for today, but looking to the next few days, 10 days in advance, to start making some decision and raise awareness. So that's in a very short way description of the service. I'm more than happy to receive questions on that. And also we've improved the service in the last few years, and that's described at the end of the paper. And we've got a program of improvement coming also. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Kate, your hand up, is that for a question now?
It is indeed. Thank you. And I have to acknowledge that the vast improvements to the system, and I just also want to acknowledge paragraph 33, which is really interesting, that the ORC is delivering a service here that isn't mandatory or required. It's a discretionary thing, but it is one of the highest valued parts of our work to an extent in certain areas. And I just want to acknowledge that first. The question I've got, and having acknowledged it's improved and everything, the one liability or difficulty in the system occasionally has been when you get rain events, you get lack of sun. The solar systems that we've got enabling some of this flow data or rainfall data to be transferred isn't necessarily maximised because of the battery range to send this information. Can I understand, because it's not covered, what we're doing both with our own system's ability to keep going and giving that information in bad weather events, but also our work, and maybe it's through CDEM, for cell tower resilience, because that isn't necessary. We don't control that, but we can be an advocate for better cell coverage because it has been going out, and that therefore compromises people's ability to get the information.
Thanks, Kate, for the question. So our environmental monitoring team look after the rain gauge and flow gauge network that contributes a lot of information to both our community and to the forecasting work described in this paper. The team goes through regular, the assets they use within those sites are quite short life. And the technology changes quite quickly, battery life changes quite quickly, comms modes can change quite quickly. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of proprietary satellite technology is becoming cheaper, things that are more, and battery life is getting a lot longer. And so as we go through renewals or upgrades to sites, just on your kind of normal asset replacement cycles, we're getting quite big improvements in the level of service that those sites provide and the reliability of comms and all of that sort of stuff. So that's a constant cycle of improvement. And just because you can't buy the old stuff that didn't work as well anymore, like for instance, the 3G network's been turned off at the moment. A lot of our sites ran off 3G primarily for a long period of time. All of our sites are being upgraded to 4 or 5G technology where that's available, or if it's a really critical site, being satellite comms are being added as a backup as well. So there's always improvements and changes going on in that space. Too many to list or regularly report to the committee, but that's just a constant cycle of improvement. And then the other thing too is there's a constant dialogue between teams in terms of which sites are important, which sites need that additional level of service to better inform flood assumptions or flood forecasting in the future. And then the other part that I just acknowledge in there is that obviously the last couple of years we've made significant upgrades to the way that data is presented online. So we've gone from pictorial maps that aren't really able to be interrogated on web pages through to a fully customizable online data portal. You can look at things on a map scale. You can look at things in terms of detailed daily changes in flow, or you can look at annual flow records if you want to pull even longer. So that tool and the visibility that the tool provides has changed remarkably. But what has come with that is obviously we're all aware of the data portal going down in that October 2024 event. So that's introduced a risk that we're working on improving, and that work's ongoing at the moment. It's even making good progress. And the other thing that it introduced is sometimes those comms are a bit slower than we would like, and certainly that I know many in the community would like. Might see an hour delay pretty regularly in terms of that data coming through to communities. So we were also working on that and how we ensure that that pipeline of information and data, that what we're observing is that most of that data is getting back to the system. It just takes quite a long time to move from Hydrotel, which is our system in the back end, through to the data portal itself. So we're just working on how to improve that as well. But yeah, certainly there's a lot going on in that space, and hopefully that gives you a decent picture.
It does. There is one that I think we need to work at a different level, and I don't know that it is your job, and that is the cellular tower network and its resilience, because that tends, and we're all becoming reliant on it, but it does seem to fail relatively quickly in events these days. And if you can't get the data, you can't get the data. I think appreciating that is, we may not have a statutory role. I do think we've got a role under CDM to be advocating for better and batteries in the cell towers, because I know that they're just not giving us the length of time in bad weather because they are so reliant on solar. And telcos don't tend to care about those things so much at in bad weather events. They don't have a role or responsibility like we do. So I think we need to be doing that work. I don't know how that may work in with this committee making a recommendation or something. I'm not quite sure what the best way forward is there.
Oh, look, just to talk to that briefly, I did intend to cover that off, but I got a bit carried away on the data portal stuff. The CDM team through the Lifelines, the regional Lifelines group, are regularly working on these types of conversations. Obviously, cell communication is really important for a lot of other Lifelines activities, and so that point is well made. And I know that the team at a kind of infrastructure owners level through that Lifelines group are working hard on kind of what those key sites are and how do we create greater resilience within them, or what is the need for greater resilience. So that work's ongoing. I'm not sure how that'll be reported or how that'll change, or how any change will be reported over time, but I'll certainly consider that and have a chat to Matt about how we get some of that more visible in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We'll just
Tom.
keep on asking questions if we don't get delivery.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Kate. We've got Kevin and then, Gary and then Kevin.
Thanks. The time delay or the and then is of concern. Like it's great that we, as technology is moving on and we are able to get better forward warning, but then it does come at a lag, and sometimes it might be a small window of time, and and up to an hour can be quite concerning. But it is what it is. Also, the flow recorders get less accurate as the flood levels get higher, don't they?
For our key sites, you would have seen papers through here from EM in the past. We look at heli gauging and other bits and pieces. And so for our key sites, like a good example would be Outram Glen. That site is really well gauged, and so when we do get up to that higher flow rate, we do have high levels of confidence in it. But there are other sites that are typically a low flow site or aren't so well gauged that certainly the confidence starts to change a bit as those flow rates get up to the extreme end.
Yep. Do you use cameras as well?
Not currently, but I was up in Gisborne last week looking at some flood damage and flood recovery processes up there, and part of that was looking at a bunch of the lessons they've learned and some of their flow site lessons, and they've picked up some relatively cheap and really easy to implement camera technology that we'll certainly look at longer term for them.
We're using camera technology, and it's just transformed what we're doing. It's real time. You can just go and see and then watch it, and coupled with a flow gauge, it's actually very simple, cheap, and it's awesome water management.
Yeah, no, 100% agree.
Kevin.
So much of this information is about protecting people and ensuring that they're out of the way. If we lose a piece of equipment, so be it, but it's around people. So I suppose my biggest worry in all this tremendous advancement that we're making on technology and the likes is actually ensuring, so have we got a cut-off point that when systems do overload, that the critical people in our systems are actually getting that information, so we can cut out the 30 people up Ferry Road in Oamaru that are trying to watch the Balclutha flood on their camera or whatever they're doing. Can we stop the system to ensure that our critical people are still getting the right information?
So I think I mentioned before, we have there's the kind of web-based system that everyone can see, and that's really easy to use. And so often our flood team will defer to that system because it's just easy to get the data you need in a timely fashion. But where it is playing up, or where it is overloaded, or whatever, that team has the ability to go straight into the back-end system, and that doesn't. That is a lot more reliable, so they can get in there. It's a little bit more fiddly to use, but certainly still gives them exactly what they need. So yeah, we do have fail safes and the ability to get the data to the people that need it.
Thank you.
Any further questions around the room? I don't see any. So thank you very much, John and Tom, for that reporting. I think Andrew.
Happy to move the.
Happy to move. Andrew moving. We have a seconder. Elliot, thank you very much.
Can I just make a comment?
Certainly you can.
I think just picking up on Kate's point, about cell phone, tower, battery resilience, I suppose. And I just wonder whether you should raise that through LGNZ at the next AGM via a remit. It's probably something that I'm happy to raise with Gretchen, or we can discuss when we have a gathering of CE and councillors next time.
Yes, so certainly, Andrew, the normal process when it comes time for LGNZ conference, we would communicate with all councillors around what remits the council may choose to put up. Obviously, there have to be consensus on that. So there was one, I can't remember yesterday, but someone also mentioned yesterday that might fit into that category as well. So we can certainly pick that up at that time. And just to give reassurance as time that this CDM and NEMA are obviously very big on this issue, and it is discussed reasonably regularly, but it wouldn't hurt to also have it through the LGNZ channel as well.
Thank you.
Does anyone need to speak to this recommendation, which is that we note the report? No, well, let's put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? All passed. So look, thank you very much. That is the end of this meeting. I know that many of us will be moving out to do other things, so I will just close this off with a karakia now. Kia tau te rangamaria, kia ronga, i ngā iwi o te ao. Let peace reign in all the peoples of the world. Thank you very much, everyone.